Hey folks, welcome to another webinar brought to you by streamingchurch.tv. And today it's also brought to you by trinitydigitalmedia.com. We'll get into that in just a little bit. The name of our webinar is called 3 Ways to Stream with ProPresenter. And we have a guest host today that we will be talking with and interviewing here in just a moment. He's going to be presenting this. His name is Paul Alan Clifford. We'll get to Paul in just a moment. But we do want to say thank you for those of you watching our webinar today. We've been doing this for a long time, off and on for many years. In fact, the last 2 or 3 years, I think we've been doing it every month. So brought to you by streamingchurch.tv. We'll get into that in a little bit. So we'll talk about ProPresenter, but first, let me take a moment to introduce the people involved in this webinar. And I'll just go ahead and, for the sake of time, introduce them and tell you a little bit about them. First one is going to be, of course, Steve Lacey. He is our founder and CEO of streamingchurch.tv. I've known Steve for about 30 years and worked with him for about 15. Like all of us here today, we have been involved in ministry. Steve has been involved in ministry in some capacity for many, many years, his leadership and involved in tech with his church and all that. Moving on, here we have Michael Gray with us. He's behind the scenes. He's producing this webinar today. He does tech support for streamingchurch.tv, but I've known Michael for about 15 years. And again, involved in ministry as a church online pastor, executive pastor, and pretty much everything else. And then there's me, and I've been involved in ministry since the dark ages and done everything from senior pastor to executive pastor to other things. And I also work with streamingchurch.tv, customer care and streaming video. Our guest host today is Paul Alan Clifford. We've known Paul for a number of years and been our guest on the Church Solutions podcast many times. He's the founder and CEO of Trinity Digital Ministry. And Paul he's an author. He's a writer, he's a podcaster, he's a videographer, he's an expert in presentation stuff with churches. He'll even come over to your house and put together the IKEA table that you bought that you needed help on. All right, maybe he won't do that, but he is an expert. Paul, anything you want to add to what I just mentioned?
I guess basically I help churches reach their redemptive potential using technology, especially ProPresenter is what I'm known for, but live streaming as well. And it's, you said ministry, it was Trinity Digital Media, but that's okay. That's my company website. My premier product is Church Tech U, but we'll get to all that.
Yeah, we will. And so we're going to do something a little different today. Normally, we ask you to hang around. We're going to tell you what we're going to give away. And so we want to encourage you to hang around. But today, we're going to tell you right off the bat, Paul is very generous. And at the end of this webinar, we're going to have a drawing. And somebody's going to win a free 1-year subscription to Church Tech. Paul, tell us, what is Church Tech?
Well, Church Tech U is my online church tech training community. And every week, I do a live class kind of like this, where my members hop on a chat and they say, hey, I had this problem on Sunday, or my pastor said, hey, can we do thus and so, or I just don't understand this aspect. And so I answer those questions live, record it, and then upload that along with pre-recorded tutorials on how to do various aspects of church tech, especially ProPresenter and some video production stuff. So this is kind of just like what I'm going to be doing later on tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And I'd love to have anyone who likes this to join me weekly for that.
Okay, so we're going to give away, you're going to give away a free 1-year subscription. And the way people have a chance to win that would be just sending us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. You see it there on the screen, support@streamingchurch.tv. At the end of this webinar, we'll have a drawing for that. All right. So anyhow, we're going to talk about 3 ways to stream with ProPresenter. And before I do that, I want to be able to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to let Mr. Paul Alan Clifford be able to share his screen if I put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. We're actually using some new software here, so forgive us if we stumble around more than usual. There's a place somewhere to stop sharing my screen, and I don't know where it is.
Phil, I don't think you were sharing your screen.
Well, that's a shame. That's a real shame, isn't it? So,
well, That's okay. I'll go ahead and share mine, and we'll just pretend we saw it the entire time. And you can go in and post and overlay it and just pretend like that's the way it was always meant to be.
You know, you're exactly right about that, Paul. Thank you for having my back there. So, Mr. Paul Alan Clifford, take it away.
Okay, so a lot of churches use ProPresenter in their church services. You're looking at ProPresenter 18.1 here, which is the latest version. And so I joke that before the pandemic, a lot of churches said, "Oh, we'll never live stream. We'll never live stream." And I kind of imagine that in heaven, the Lord was just laughing at the idea that they would never do that because, of course, he knew what was coming. Well, so I thought that we would go through 3 possible ways that you could live stream from ProPresenter, either within it or using it to augment your live stream. Because some people just have one of these and they hold it up in the back of the room and they call that a live stream. And technically it is, but you could just do so much better. And so I've got quite a lot of technology here in my home office, and so thought we would go through some of the things that you could do. First off, ProPresenter itself can live stream. So what you can do is, if we go into ProPresenter up here and then down to settings and inputs, see there's a live camera input coming from my webcam. It's the same one you're seeing on the screen here in Riverside. But I can also aircast into ProPresenter. That's something they added with 18. So this is a USB camera that we see here. I could also use something like this. This is a Blackmagic Design Ultra Studio Recorder 3G, which is basically a capture card. I could take video from basically any camera using either HDMI or SDI here and capture that into ProPresenter using that piece of gear. The one that you're looking at is a USB webcam, which it's a little disconcerting to see so many of me. So I'm just going to select one of the other inputs. And you can also capture in NDI, which is a virtual camera source. PTZ Optics cameras are famous for using NDI to send their video over the network. So you've got a lot of choices. You can capture up to 8 cameras into ProPresenter. So that's kind of cool that you could even basically use it like a video switcher. So we've got, this is where you set all that up. And then once you've set that up, you can go down here to the bottom left, and we've got a video inputs section. So I can switch between multiple cameras right here just by clicking on those little thumbnails and having those show up in ProPresenter. Now, the advantage of that is then I could send that out via a screen, just regular HDMI, or it could be SDI, any of those things. I could send it out there to either encoding software like Open Broadcast software, OBS, Open Broadcast Studio is it's also called, and do it that way. So send it over the network to another computer. Could be the other computer is right next to the ProPresenter machine, or you could even send it to OBS on the same computer. No problem doing that as well. And so that's probably the first way that you could do it, is capture your video into ProPresenter and then put your graphics overlay on top and send that out to encoding software. And then from there, maybe you send it to streamingchurch.tv for your live stream. Up to you. And that's a great way to do that. So that's the first way. But there are a couple of other ways too. So if you want to take some of the heavy lifting off of ProPresenter's shoulders, what you could do is, instead of using ProPresenter like a video switcher, which let's be fair that if you have a pretty high-end machine, then you can do that no problem. Like I said, up to 8 live video inputs. But that also includes maybe some extra mental bandwidth for the person running ProPresenter, because they've got to remember, okay, I need to switch between my cameras while I'm switching between slides and everything like that. So you could, and I usually tell people, when you get more than 3 or 4 cameras, it's probably worth buying a video switcher. They're not all that expensive nowadays. When I first started doing this back 25 years ago, a video switcher was like tens of thousands of dollars for a cheap one. Nowadays, you can get an inexpensive one for $250 that could do 4 inputs. And so you could do that instead and have someone else handle the video switching between the different cameras, and then capture the output of your video switcher into ProPresenter. I actually have a video switcher here in my studio. It's the ATEM Television Studio HD, another Blackmagic device. I like Blackmagic primarily for the same reason the churches like Blackmagic, or Blackmagic Design, not Blackmagic itself. In case you need to put that into the church budget, you might want to just call it BMD. Otherwise, you never know when you're going to get called in front of the elders or the deacons to explain why you want to spend money on Blackmagic. Which was just a joke until I heard that it actually happened to someone in one of my in-person classes. Anyway, this is the remote control software that controls a Blackmagic switcher. So I've got one in a rack just off to my left. You're right as you're looking at me. And basically, I can have 8 video sources switch between those. And then I could capture the output of that into ProPresenter and overlay my graphics. Or I could do what I'm doing, which is I have the ability to send the output out of ProPresenter and key that, overlay it, kind of like my nameplate is on me right here in the Riverside. But this would be done with hardware from ProPresenter into my video switcher, and then send that out to, again, some live encoding software like OBS. There are other options, by the way, not just OBS. Or maybe even a hardware encoder that would do the final work of preparing it to send it to your live streaming host. So that's kind of the second way to do that. The third way is I could actually encode within ProPresenter. So here in ProPresenter, if I go up to the upper right-hand corner, there's a button that's marked Live. And so if I go down to Capture Settings, what I can do is I can take the output of one of my screens. It doesn't matter which one. Right now I've got several possibilities here, but I might have one that is just specific for the live stream. And so I capture either multiple cameras into ProPresenter and switch those there, or I could capture the output of my video switcher into ProPresenter and then overlay my graphics on those things, and then send that out to my live stream. Here we have the RTMP standard, which basically, with only a few exceptions, nearly every live streaming host uses. And then you can Basically, you put in the address, which you'll notice the example here, it's kind of harder to see, but it says RTMPS. It could be a secure live stream like RTMPS, or it could be just a regular live stream. But that's roughly analogous. I know it's not exactly. Steve would probably correct me if I were to say this without saying roughly analogous to a website URL. So it starts out with the protocol : // just like a website does, and then you put in the address that your live streaming host has given you. But you might be thinking, well, so that's fine, but couldn't anyone just in the world live stream? Who knows what they would put on my live stream if they were to do that? Well, that's why we have this other field, key, which is this big, long alphanumeric string of numbers and letters that you'll get, again, from your live streaming host, which I think of as roughly analogous to a password. It also tells the live streaming host, hey, this is this particular client, this particular church in our case, that would be getting that information, as opposed to just anyone. Yeah,
Paul, I just had
Bill?
a question, and we are, I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, we are taking Q&A at the end of this presentation, so if people have questions, they can type them in the chat. But I'll jump in real quick here with a question, and that is, some streaming providers provide not just the RTMP and the stream key or stream name, but they also ask you to have a username as well as a password. Is there a field for those two other things in ProPresenter?
No, there isn't. So we've got, basically, I've got three options here. We'll ignore the last one today, but the first one is just to record it directly to disk. So that's just saving it, a recording. And then the next one is RTMP. And those are the only fields that it has in it. So,
and there's workarounds for
that's
that. I should say there are workarounds for that. You can embed,
right.
Usually the streaming provider can embed the username and password in that RTMP.
Right. So it could be that when you get that address, it's not a generic one for everyone that the streaming provider has. It's just, you may not, depending on how they do it, it might not be obvious to you that they have done it, but it's probably the case in that situation that, yep, it's all embedded in there. So it might not look as generic as this one, which is RTMPS : / example.com/live. It might be something where it's like got a long string of stuff there, and you might not even know, and you don't need to know. Just as long as you do what they tell you to, then you can put that information in there. And by the way, while we're here, we can also record a local copy as well, which is always nice to have in case there's some sort of problem with your internet. I've got right here, I've got an a gigabit up and down, and yet last night I was watching a video and it just stopped and buffered and everything. Cleared itself up. But if I had been live streaming during that, it could be that it would have been problematic. So even if you've got superior internet and most of the time you don't have any problems, it's good to know that you could have a local recording to upload later if you do. So that's something else that's nice about doing all this within ProPresenter. And so those are kind of your basic ways of doing it. Just to recap, to go capture any live video sources into ProPresenter and send that out to something that does the encoding to prepare it for the live stream. Switch between video sources in a video switcher and either take the output of ProPresenter and overlay that in the video switcher, or capture the output of your video switcher into ProPresenter and then send that out. Or 3, do every last bit within ProPresenter. I will say I've done all 3. They all 3 work, no problems whatsoever. Personally, I think it's a best practice to split stuff up, because if you have a problem with any one piece of gear, you can fall back to the third way of doing this. If you've got, well, as long as it's not the computer that you have problems with. So if you have a separate encoding computer and it has problems, well, just fall back to doing it in ProPresenter. If you have a problem with your ProPresenter computer, but you're encoding elsewhere, then you could just have a very basic live stream and say, hey, no words this week, but we acknowledge and we're working on it, and deal with it that way. So I just like the flexibility and like having the ability to, if you're in a situation where something goes wrong, you have the ability to have a backup plan where you already know you can do it, even if that's not your normal plan of doing it.
I've got
Go
a
ahead.
question. Make sure I understand the second option. So you were talking about taking ProPresenter and sending it over to possibly like a hardware encoder. And so if I'm going to a hardware encoder, then I would do my video switching in that hardware encoder. So I'd only have the ProPresenter feed coming in, right? I wouldn't have other cameras connected to that hardware encoder.
Yeah, so here's what I'm imagining. I'm imagining Blackmagic again. They make a box called I'm blanking on it. The Web Presenter. So it used to be that the Web Presenter was like a glorified version of this that cost more money. They have since updated it. I think it's the Web Presenter HD is the one that I'm thinking of, that all it does is it takes a video signal and then it encodes it for your live streaming host. So you give it all the same information that you would be giving to ProPresenter, the URL there, and then the key. I guess that's not technically a URL, but you give it all that stuff and it does that. Well, there are some switchers that also do that same thing. So the Blackmagic ATEM Mini Pro, for example, which is a slightly different one than what I have, can both switch and encode. So in that case, probably what I would do is I would send the output of ProPresenter into that switcher and then use the switcher to overlay the things on top of one another and then send that final product to your live streaming host. So that's kind of the way, if you've got that hardware, that's a good way to do it. I will say that if you capture live video into and then output that again, there's going to be at least 3 frames of latency. And that's just enough that some of us who are techie will notice it. And that one guy at your church that complains about everything is probably going to notice it too. That's just the way it works. He's probably going to claim it's of the devil because there's some latency and it looks like the pastor's lips aren't matching, So in general, it's a best practice if you're going to show that video live under any circumstance to send it through a video switcher, not send it through a computer. So any other questions, Steve or Phil?
Well, I mean, do you still have some other things to say? I mean, I've got a few questions lined up here, but I thought I might save them.
Yeah. So one of the things that maybe people don't know about when I mention keying or overlaying, that's what it means. I never want to talk down to anyone, but I don't want to talk above anyone's head. So sometimes that's a fine line. When I mention keying, a lot of people just assume that I'm talking about chroma key, which is the ability to remove a single color, or perhaps a luminance key or luma key, which just removes typically black from the signal. Well, those are both fine, but they come with limitations. And while you can do that with ProPresenter, there's even a plugin where you could do a color key within it. I think the best practice is to do what I call which is also known as a linear key. So if we go up here to screens and configure screens, because I happen to know that mine is set up for this, I've got, I think it's this one, yes. So this screen here that I have called live stream, I'm actually outputting that with the Decklink Duo 2 card. Again, a piece of Blackmagic hardware, which the Duo has 4 outputs. Normally we think Duo is 2, but think of it as 2 alpha outputs that you can swap out and do some stuff with. But so for alpha, we're sending 2 signals out of ProPresenter, one that looks like just a regular signal and another one that looks like a black and white version of that other signal. You send that into your video switcher. Here's how I have mine set up: alpha type pre-multiplied, an external key, and blended 100%. And what's happening is, if I go over here to my software here, is if I go down here to my downstream key, it's key 2 here that is using, I need to rename these, I plugged them in backwards. But basically I have these 2 video sources, and the fill source is the normal looking one, like I said, so in the case of, if you were to look down at my lower third here that says Paul Alan Clifford, probably what, if this was coming from ProPresenter, for example, it would have a black background, and then it would have the red lower third with my name in it with white letters, and then the white presenter under it. That's the way that it would look. But then when we looked at the key source, the way that that would look is it would be a black and white version of that, where the background would still be black, but everything else would be white. So I'm wanting to put my mouse there. The so the red background color would all be solid white, and then the word presenter would be solid white as it is. And so the video switcher would take that information, and everywhere that it was white, it would say, okay, that's opaque. Everywhere that's black, that's transparent. But it has the additional feature that if this lower third was made a little bit differently, maybe the red was translucent and you could see through it just a little bit. In that case, instead of it being solid white, it would be like a gray color. And the darker the gray, the more you could see through it. And that can all be done in real time with your video switcher and ProPresenter, and then send that out to your live stream. So that's the way that most television actually does it. So when you're watching football and they've got a lower third with the score up, and maybe it looks like it's a gradient, that's actually alpha. And ProPresenter can do that professional grade graphics live in real time for your live stream, as opposed to just removing green, for example, which is all fine and good until springtime and someone forgets and makes an image of an Easter egg hunt with little Easter eggs in grass, which happen to be a similar color, and then it looks all kinds of funky. So really, if you can, alpha's the way to go.
I do have a question, Paul, about the scenario one, where I can, as you were
Mm-hmm.
going through that, that's the one where guy's driving lower third lyrics and the worship band going on, and then at the bottom he's got a bunch of camera inputs, and so he's switching cameras and doing all these things. I could see where that would be nearly impossible, seeing that I'm a switcher guy. There's no way I could switch and do lower thirds. Is there a possibility to run two versions of this on two machines, or where I've got my own version here and the other version there, and we're kind of sharing control of the thing? Or is that a possibility?
Yep. There's a couple of things that you can do. So first off, you can do two versions, one that just does the switching and one that handles the lyrics and such. Absolutely, no problem doing that. Another thing is that one thing I love about ProPresenter is it always felt to me, I started using it with ProPresenter 3, it always felt to me like this was programmed by someone who had been in my seat at church and had run into some problems and was a programmer, so solved problems as he came upon them. And it turns out that Brad Weston, who founded Renewed Vision, that's actually the truth. He was a programmer. He used to work for Macromedia, which was bought by Adobe. And he wrote the very first version of ProPresenter for the Passion Conference, the very first Passion Conference. So it has all kinds of features that make that possible. So one of them, if we go, this right here, ProPresenter Control. Let me see if I can't pop that up here. Okay, that's shown up on another screen. I'm going to drag that over here. This has the ability to control everything but the slides. So you could go down here, you can change different stage screens, you can start timers, etc. And if I remember correctly, there's a place where I could swap between, I mean, clearly I can start the capture there. I thought that there was a place where I could swap between cameras, and I'm not seeing it right now, so it could be that it's been a while since I've used this. I could do it with the macros, absolutely. So there's an ability within ProPresenter to have complex things happen with these macros, so I could do it there. But that's one thing. Another thing that I really like doing is, let me see if I can bring this up. Yeah. So let me drag this over here to the appropriate screen. This is a new piece of software that I just got called the Screen Deck. Now, some people are going to say, but that looks a lot like a Stream Deck, and it is. It's a piece of software that someone wrote to kind of be a standalone Stream Deck, and so you could use either this. So let me go to other way. So I have this set up to where I have all control of my ATEM switcher, but there's no reason why I couldn't use that to control the video inputs of ProPresenter. So someone else could have either this on another computer or on an iPad or whatever, or they could have the hardware version, which don't have quite enough cable to show you, but I've got one right in my left hand, and so I could do things like, let's see here, let's do this. So I can switch between inputs there, and so I'm not actually clicking on it. It updates in real time with the hardware. So that's something else that you can do to split up the work amongst multiple people as well. One final thing, if you have a more basic setup, is here, let me pull that out of the way. is you can actually drag these video inputs up onto a slide. And so you could say, well, I have one camera that I want to use during worship. And so I drag that up onto the first slide of worship and I click on it and it automatically switches to that camera during worship. Then whenever there's a video that plays, that covers that up. And then when we go to the sermon, there's a different camera that has that for the sermon. And when I click on the first slide of the sermon, then it switches that. So there's an innumerable way, well, okay, 4 different ways that we could do that depending on your situation and how you want to accomplish that. Because like you're saying, Steve, it is a bit much for one person to both switch between multiple cameras and make sure the lyrics are firing at the right time, etc.
Yeah. So I've got a few really practical questions here, but before I do that, I want to share my screen. And so I'm actually going to try to do that. So I think I need you to stop sharing your screen, maybe, Paul. And then I want to actually, this time, share my screen. And I want to, before we get to a couple more questions and the giveaway, I want to do that. And I'm hoping that I am now. Let's see. Am I sharing my screen, guys?
No.
No, you're
I'm not seeing it.
All right. Well, that is really disappointing here because I thought I had it down here. Let's see here. Paul,
Before we got started,
it
worked fine.
It did, right? So before I do that, let me just say this. Paul, what is ProPresenter? Well, one question we have while I'm trying to figure out this thing is ProPresenter capable of streaming to multiple destinations besides
Not
just one
right
place?
now.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways around that. You could, for example, send the output to OBS, and OBS, for example, with, I think it's a plugin, it's been a while since I've checked, can send to multiple places. But keep in mind, if you're sending from your location to multiple places, every additional place that you send it to. So let's say you wanted to send it to Facebook and YouTube at the same time. That's double the upload bandwidth that you need. If you're like, oh yeah, it just barely works right now. Hey, look, you got it to work. It just barely works right now. So I'm going to have this other as a backup. No. That's like saying I just barely have enough hot water going to my shower, and so to solve that problem, I'm going to turn on the hot water in the sink. Nope, you're going to get half of the hot water. So that's not, but there are third-party services that you can send one up to and then have it go to multiple places.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And now that I figured this thing out, coming up, a Q&A and a drawing coming up real quick here, but coming up, our next webinar is going to be the end of February, February 25th, with the co-founder of Sermon Shots, Corey Alderin, and Sermon Shots and StreamingChurch.tv are teaming up together. And we're going to make your streaming video easier and sharing your sermon clips easier with Sermon Shots. So that webinar is coming up February 25th at 12 o'clock. Mark that on your calendar. You can always, it's not there yet, but you can always sign up at webinar.streamingchurch.tv for that. And then we do want to encourage people, check out the resources that we have to offer. Daily Live 365 is a brand new product that you should check out. We have a Church Solutions podcast. We have a blog at blog.streamingchurch.tv or streamingchurch.tv/blog. Is that right, Steve, for that other address? I think it is.
Yes.
And then,
Either one.
Yeah, and of course, there's streamingchurch.tv. And of course, trinitydigitalmedia.com are the fine people that have, which is Paul Alan Clifford, that are helping us with that. All right, so Paul, before we do the Q&A, we want to remind people they have a chance to win a free 1-year subscription to your Church Tech U by sending an email to support@streamingchurch.tv. Now that we've got through that, a couple more questions for you, Paul. First of all, what is the cost of ProPresenter? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
So the answer is it kind of depends. So if you already have ProPresenter and you have a active what they call ProPresenter Plus account, this changed this past fall, so that's why it depends a bit. Then as long as you keep that up, the price will remain the same for the foreseeable future. Renewed Vision has said that if there is a price increase, it's going to be like an inflation type price increase, not a everyone gets charged the same amount of money, which is the second piece. If you do not currently have ProPresenter, or you have like your ProPresenter Plus expired a year ago or whatever, then there is a monthly price, which I'm blanking on, but I can figure out here real quick. So if you go to renewedvision.com, they've got that. And for a single seat, which is just the one that does the presenting, you can always get a free one that you can create ProPresenter stuff with.
But it doesn't stream. I mean, there's a streaming version and there's a non-streaming version, right? Of ProPresenter? Yes?
No, it does everything. The standard per seat, I just found it. The standard per seat cost is $29 a month, so less than $1 a day, except for next month, which will be slightly over $1 a day. But February is like that. But for the campus seat, it's $59 a month, which if you're doing the math, you're like, well, that's just slightly over 2 seats. And I think if I was in a situation where I needed to present from 2 computers at the same time, then I would just go ahead and go with the campus license, even though it's like $1 extra, because I bet I'm going to run into a situation sometime in the future where I would want to add a third. The youth ministry hears about it or something, and might as well. It's worth it to me for that.
Paul, I'm a pastor listening to this webinar, and we use Wirecast, or maybe we use vMix, and we're seriously thinking about ProPresenter. Number one, we've just seen this webinar. What's the learning curve for maybe my volunteers of a church of 100, 150 people? What's the learning curve like for somebody that's been using Wirecast, for instance, for a couple years, and now we're going to maybe go with ProPresenter?
Right. So Wirecast is less a presentation software and more live switching and live encoding software. So it is possible that you could output out of ProPresenter and capture it into Wirecast, and then that doesn't change that end of things. Let me say that when I was introduced to ProPresenter, I got like a 5-10 minute tutorial on, hey, this is where the slides are. You click on one, then you click on the next one. You can also hit the space bar to go to the next one. And I think that you could absolutely get someone up to speed on that level of things pretty quickly. Now, making presentations, making playlists, that kind of thing, that's a little more complex, but it's not super hard. Just basically doing a search, dragging and dropping the appropriate thing, and making sure everything's in the right order for church. Not all that hard. So where the real power comes in is all the other things that ProPresenter can do. So the live streaming, for example, if you wanted to forego Wirecast, etc., altogether and just do it all in ProPresenter, that's going to be a little more complex. But I will tell you that I have more tutorials online about ProPresenter than anyone else. And total amount of video I've released about ProPresenter, either inside of Church Tech U or on my YouTube channel or whatever, I'm pretty sure is more than everyone else combined. So you can always go to youtube.com/Paul Clifford, and I bet I have the answer to the question that you have.
Okay. Another question came in here. How does ProPresenter differ from Media Shout?
Okay, so they're very similar in what they do, except that Media Shout it's kind of the granddaddy of all all the worship software. It's been around for a really long time. With that said, there are a few things that ProPresenter is just better at. So Media Shout might be perfectly acceptable and might work fine for you, but I can have up to 8 screens in ProPresenter, each instance of ProPresenter. I could also have multiple instances of ProPresenter that control one another. So I could get to the situation where I could have 32 different screens that have similar information or information that's reformatted or sent to our basic 2 types of screens are the audience screen for the congregation, and the other screen is the stage screen, which is reformatted in such a way that it's not as pretty, but it works great for the people that are leading from the front. So it's been a while since I've looked at Media Shout, so I can't think off the top of my head just every difference, but I know that some of my favorite features in ProPresenter are Reflow Editor, which allows you to quickly take a song and change the number of lines, not new slide, copy, paste, more like click where you want the slide to divide, hit a keyboard shortcut, and it divides. You want to combine 2 slides? No problem. Click where you want to combine those 2 slides. You hit the backspace button and it combines. There are also arrangements. So if you sing one song multiple ways, you only have one thing inside of your library. So, for example, let's say it's the song Egypt, and you've got one worship leader that sings it one way and another that sings it the other way. Well, you can have one entry in your library, and then at a glance on the left-hand side, you can see which arrangement it is that you've got in before you even get to it. So that's pretty cool as well. Full screen graphics in person, lower third, lyrics for your live stream or recording, etc. So really powerful and can do a lot.
Okay. I don't know if you can see the chat here, Paul, but Terry's got a question. What are the options coming into renewal? What if we don't renew? What are the benefits of renewal? So not sure I understand that, but maybe you do.
Yep. Yeah. So ProPresenter is switching over from a yearly price that was not technically required, but a lot of people did renew it every year, to a monthly price that if you go with that, if you quit paying, then it will put a watermark on your screens. It's think more like Adobe and less like, well, I bought Windows 95 back in the day. I could still use that. Yes, you can if you can find a computer that can run it. I'm not sure you would want to because there's been a lot of changes. So with that said, it was called ProPresenter Plus, the old way of doing things, where once a year you would pay and you would get all the updates for the subsequent year and you would get support. So if you continue to renew with the ProPresenter Plus price, it is a better deal than if you went with the monthly price. Now, if you don't renew, let's say the current version is 18.1. So if you don't renew, 18.1 will continue to work. But for example, on the Mac side of things, every year Apple releases a new version of their operating system. We have no idea what they're even planning at this point. It's January. Here in the spring, they will announce it and then it will be released in October. So it could be that when it's released, it has some feature that you just have to have. But you try and put the current version of ProPresenter on it and something goes wrong. Something doesn't display properly, maybe it doesn't fire up at all, etc. Well, then you've got to stay on the older version of the operating system. Occasionally there are some third-party things, so Planning Center Online, Song Select by CCLI, Multitracks, etc. So there are these third-party integrations that Renewed Vision is using their API to talk to. We've already had a situation where Song Select by CCLI changed their API and it quit working in older versions of ProPresenter. And so if that's important to you, it could be that there's an issue. So just something to consider. And it could be that it'll work fine for you for years to come, no problem. But it's up to you whether you want to make that gamble. And it might not be a bad one, or it might be.
Okay.
All right.
So Phil, let's get to our drawing.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna and I'm gonna enlist Michael Gray behind the scenes here to help us with this. If Michael's still with us, we're doing a new thing here. There you go. We're doing a new thing here, folks. So okay, well, that's probably what I should be. Michael, do we have a winner for the 1-year subscription to Church Tech U, brought to you by Trinity Digital Media?
Okay. So and if you don't win this gift, then you're in the running for another one, right? Is that right, Phil? Paul, did I understand this correctly?
Paul, is there something like 50% off or something?
There is. So if you're in a situation where you really wanted it and you don't win it, no big deal. We can go ahead, and I've got a 50% off code, so you can save all kinds of money.
All right.
I'll give you that here in just a minute. In
Okay.
fact, I'll go ahead and I will paste the code into the chat. And if you just go to www.churchtechu, just the letter u.com, pick any one of the 3 options, monthly, quarterly, or yearly, and put in that coupon code. It'll give you 50% off for the up until Thursday.
No, that's great. Okay.
And then that's locked in after that.
Super. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, this is one of the smoothest webinars we've done. Chris Beasley. All right. And you're going to take care of all that, Michael and Paul. You guys are going to coordinate. All right. Good.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we really do appreciate everybody's patience today, especially with me as usual. And this has been brought to you by streamingchurch.tv as well as trinitydigitalmedia.com. Please check them out. Paul, always a pleasure to be with you.
Always love it. You guys are great. And I think I've been on so many of these things, either the Church Solutions podcast or now this, that maybe I need a t-shirt from you. I don't know.
We'll send you a coffee mug. We don't even have that. All right. Well, we'll figure out something. I don't know. All right, folks, thank you for being with us today on the webinar. Be sure and sign up for our next webinar, as we're going to be working with Corey Alderin at sermonshots.com. We're working with him, streamingchurch.tv, and the webinar is going to be February 25th, and you can sign up sometime in the very near future at webinar.streamingchurch.tv. I'm Phil Thompson on behalf of the whole gang here. Please take care of yourself and each other, and we'll catch you again on another webinar.